Described as a watershed moment in relations between the United States and Cuba. Now, though, the political temperature is rising as the two countries pursue a thaw in diplomatic relations. We start in Havana with CCTV's Michael Voss. Now that this new reality is settling in, how are Cubans reacting to the news?
Mike, I think the reality of what's happened, the enormity of what's happened in the last 24 hours is only now starting to sink in. The fact that both President Barack Obama and President Raul Castro gave simultaneous televised addresses to their nations to announce that they would normalize and restore diplomatic relations. You have to remember that the majority of Cubans were born after the revolution. They've no other relationship. For them, the United States, this big neighbor just 90 miles across the Straits of Florida, has always been an antagonistic neighbor, a neighbor that hasn't recognized the legitimacy of this government, a neighbor that has wanted to see regime change here by various means over the years, and that is now coming to an end. It's a whole different world for people. I think it's starting to sink in. Everybody I've spoken to today has had this huge smile on their face as they realize the changes that are coming now. And I think there's a lot of hope now that things will improve both economically and politically. And I think a lot of people are wondering whether this latest move is perhaps the first step towards a much speedier reform here in Cuba.
Every morning, hundreds of Cubans gather outside the U.S. interest section in Havana, hoping to get tourist or immigration visas. It's an embassy in everything but name. There's a huge U.S. diplomatic presence in Havana. 67 Americans work here and almost 300 locally hired support staff. So what difference will this change in relations make?
I think that the whole policy of the United States was predicated on the question that the Cuban government was illegitimate and therefore no diplomatic relations. Now, with diplomatic relations, the Cuban government is legitimate. You can negotiate.
There's still a long way to go before these two countries have normal relations. It'll take an act of Congress to end the trade embargo, and no one's expecting that to happen anytime soon. The tourism ban also still stands, but US President Barack Obama is making it easier for Americans to get permission to visit the island, and they can now use US credit cards when they get here. Much of Cuba's fledgling private sector could benefit from changes which will increase the amount of money Cuban Americans can send home. Giovanni Ramirez runs a mobile phone and laptop repair business. Today, he has to find many of the spare parts he needs on the black market. Now, with the US lifting restrictions on some communication equipment sales to Cuba, he hopes this will help his business.
With the reestablishment of relations, I think that things will go fine. If we could get more technology and import parts for our business, it would make a big difference.
But the really big news in Cuba is the prisoner swap and the return of the 3 remaining intelligence officers who've spent more than 15 years in US jails. They're considered national heroes. State television ran an extended program showing the tearful reunions with their wives and families and the neighborhood street parties which greeted their return home.
Mike, the next steps are likely to be the Treasury and Commerce departments in the United States issuing guidelines, going through the details and saying just what these changes mean and issuing new rules. And then in January, a senior State Department official will come here to start talks about how exactly they open and reopen embassies in both countries.
A lot of stuff still yet to work out. There's already, though, strong opposition in the U.S. to restart diplomacy with Cuba, as you know. Some members of Congress very outspoken, sounding off about this plan. I'm just curious, are you hearing any of that in Cuba?
Well, apart from a few dissidents who say, you know, nothing should have changed until Cuba had changed politically and democracy had returned here. No, you're not. I am told by some sources that there were debates and have been over the past within the Communist Party about whether any change should take place before the United States lifts the trade embargo. And therefore, I think there was some surprise in some quarters that President Raul Castro has gone ahead with the decision to resume diplomatic relations and reopen embassies and restart all sorts of ties while the trade embargo remains in place. But President Raul Castro is very much of a pragmatist, and I think he saw an opening here, a window of opportunity, and I think that this is seen as a major victory for him. One Cuban told me that were there to be an opinion poll today in Cuba, then the chances are that the standing of President Raul Castro would be much higher than it was even just a day and a half ago.